I met today's guest, Professor Sky Waterpeace, when he presented at the IANDS conference. And he is a mathematician and was an atheist until he had actually 2 near-death experiences. So he was such an interesting guest. Also, heads up, because we had so much to talk about, we talked for over 2 hours. So I'm going to divide this into 2 episodes. I'm going to try to have the second episode live by Sunday, but I might not have it until the normal time episodes launch next Thursday, but I'm trying to get it to you by Sunday. And here's a little bit more about Professor Sky Waterpeace. Sky Pelletier Waterpeace, M.A., is a mathematician, author, and outreach trainer for the Monroe Institute. A former militant atheist, Sky had 2 NDEs several years apart. These experiences led ultimately to a complete transformation of his understanding of reality and the nature of his true self. Professor Waterpeace is the author or co-author of half a dozen articles on pure and applied mathematics. And he has also published 1 novel and 1 book on super efficient training methods for runners and other athletes. Sky and his wife Becca lead virtual and in-person meditation workshops as outreach trainers for the Monroe Institute. You can find out more about Sky at skywaterpeace.com, and I'll provide links to that in the show notes. With that, I hope you will enjoy part 1 of my conversation with Professor Sky Waterpeace. Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the Science and Spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. Welcome to What the F Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listened to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey-skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I'll be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird stuff. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the F just happened? Hi, everyone. Today I am speaking with Professor Waterpeace. He is a professor at Rowan University, and We met at the IANDS, International Association for Near-Death Studies conference, and I loved his story. He's a materialist who had an NDE and his whole life changed, and he has some very logical conclusions or assessments. I mean, he could explain it better, but I think you'll enjoy this episode. So thank you, Sky. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's really my pleasure.
Of course. So now I'd like to ask you what was your view of afterlife, consciousness, all of that before having your NDE?
Oh, great question. I assumed that all consciousness was a byproduct of activity of the brain, and that when the body dies, your consciousness just goes away. Um, like if you were to turn off your PlayStation and everybody in the game just stops being there. That was my assumption. I was like you said, I was a materialist. I pretty much didn't believe in anything other than what could be measured by physics, which I now recognize is a limited view, and I don't say that pejoratively. It's fine for what it is, but stop me if I'm getting into too much detail right away. But there's a mathematician. I'm a mathematician. I teach mathematics, and there's a famous mathematician named Kurt Gödel who proved in 1931, I think, this what's called the incompleteness theorem. And the incompleteness theorem says that any sufficiently powerful system of logic is either inconsistent or it's incomplete. Inconsistent means that you can prove that true equals false, so it's sort of like not useful for real operations. But if it's consistent, if you can't show that true equals false, then it's necessarily incomplete. And what that means is that if you have a logical system which is consistent and which is powerful enough to sort of explain things that are worth explaining, and just for comparison's sake, arithmetic, it turns out, is a sufficiently powerful system. So it doesn't have to be that complicated. But any such system that is consistent must necessarily be incomplete. And what that means is there are truths that are true within that system that can never be shown to be true within that system. So, what Gödel's incompleteness theorem proves is that truth is a higher order of thing than provability. And so I didn't know this as a 20-year-old materialist. I thought, well, physics is the top explainer of all things, and it never occurred to me that you could have a perfectly rigorous system that is capable of explaining a lot of things that necessarily, no matter how good it is always going to leave some things out. Not leave some things out that are untrue, but more importantly, leave things out that are actually true but can't be proven to be true from within the system.
So it seems like, which I've noticed the further I delve into learning everything, including reading about physics, because I was a materialist as well, it seems that this kind of another way to summarize this is that we just can't know everything, that all the theories, you can understand a portion of it, and every time you think you understand it, there's some piece that just doesn't fall into place with
Yeah,
even
listen.
what we understand the most. Would that make sense?
Yeah, it's sort of like discovering something that's been known for a long time, because there's always been this concept, like if you talk about God, you could, whatever that may mean, but there's always been this idea that when you talk about a supreme being, you can't actually ever describe actual characteristics of God. You can only describe like reflections that we can sort of access. And moving it back into the realm of physics and mathematics, any system, when we discover more things, we might discover something new about the system and say, oh, okay, well, this must be a true fact, and we know it because of this reason. If we expand the system to include more of these truths that are out there that we can't otherwise prove, then that new expanded system has new things that are true that cannot be proven within the system. Like, no matter how complicated you make the system, it's always missing something, or it's inconsistent. If it's consistent, then there's always more that's true that we can't show to be true.
If this isn't too difficult a question. Is there an example in mathematics or physics that really startled you as you started delving in about that? Something you thought was fact and known that turned out not to be?
Well, it's in terms of okay, there's a lot of ways I could take that question. I'll first give you an example of what I was talking about with truth that's true that was unprovable. So there's a system of mathematics called the complex field, and complex numbers are used in physics all the time. They're used they're indispensable in solving things like electrical equations and things like that. Um, the complex number is a number which consists of two parts, a so-called real part and a so-called imaginary part. And it's not a good nomenclature because they're both actual numbers, but that's what they called them, because the idea was the imaginary part is a multiple of the square root of -1. And forgive me for getting mathy on you, but the square root of -1, it's significant because if you think back to like arithmetic, if you take two positive numbers times each other, the result is positive. Two negative numbers times each other, the result is negative. I mean, is not negative, is positive. It becomes positive. So any number times itself, whether that number starts off being positive or starts off being negative, is always going to yield a positive number. So if you take a square root, which is to say, what number do you have to multiply by itself to get this number? And I'm saying, what is the square root of -1? It's asking, what number do you multiply by itself to get a -1? And there is no number that works for, except that there actually is. It's just that the number that we call the imaginary unit, or I, is not on the real number line. So if you think of, the real number line, like we learned about in grade school, going from minus infinity all the way up to infinity, and all the numbers and all the fractions and square root of 2 and everything else, pi is on there, the number square root of -1, I, is not on that line. You have to go off of that line into a plane, basically go above that line into another dimension in order to access this number I. So it's correct that I is not part of the real number line, but it's not correct that there is no such number. It's just not the kind of number that people have been looking at. So mathematicians a few hundred years ago discovered this. They said, well, what if there were a number that worked like that? And they started working with it and discovered that if you add that as an extra number in this sort of other dimension, then the mathematics all works. It works completely. It's completely consistent. It's just that this number is not part of the regular number line. It creates its own number line going in a different direction. So that's an example of something that, for hundreds of years people thought, well, this thing can't be. There must be, when this has arisen in equations, it must be an error. We must be doing something wrong. We have to ignore it, things like that. And then eventually some smart people started working with it and said, well, what if it isn't an error? What if this actually does work? How does it work? And that is where we're getting to in the world, getting back to the idea of physics and materialism versus, after death experience. We're getting to the point now where we're just starting to ask the question, okay, instead of ignoring these reports that people have, consistent reports, thousands of people around the world, different cultures, etc., instead of ignoring them or saying, well, that must be an error or that must be a perceptual error, we're starting to ask the question, well, suppose for the sake of argument, it's not a perceptual error, but suppose in fact these thousands of people really did have these experiences that they think they had. What is the nature of that? What is it like? What does it mean? Is it consistent with other things that we know or that we believe to be true, and things like that? And to just tack on the last bit of the question that you asked, um, from my own experience, after my first near-death experience, I started questioning everything that I assumed to be true about physics, about reality, basically, because I started thinking like, okay, I must have an error introduced in my own thinking to have thought so incorrectly about what consciousness is like. And when you get right down to it, physics, at the people who really understand like the sort of limits of what we understand of physics, like quantum mechanics and things like that, they're starting to really understand that there's a whole universe of things that we don't understand at all. Like there's a so-called Planck distance, and The Planck distance is this small bit of distance, or the Planck time is this small measurement of time. And the idea is that we have no way of accessing information at a level shorter than the Planck distance. Now, for normal people in normal everyday activity, that's fine because we're not interacting with it. But it's if you think about it, for a person like myself who was a materialist, who was like, okay, science has all the answers, right? Well, scientists who know enough will tell you, like, science has all the answers for the things it has the answers for, and the things it doesn't have the answers for, it just doesn't know. And it's very clear about the fact, well, we don't know. We might have assumptions, but we simply do not know. And that's a valuable thing to recognize, because I think there's like a dichotomy between people who really understand modern science and people who think that they understand modern science but don't really understand that a real skeptic, a person who's a truly skeptical person, is skeptical not only of the things that they believe to be false, but also of the things they believe to be true. And a real skeptic is always willing to say, okay, these are my assumptions. Do these assumptions really make sense? Are these assumptions working for me in the current context that I'm using them, and so forth? All right, I went a little afield of your question, but
No, I found that all fascinating. And I actually agree what you said about being a true skeptic. I consider myself that. And I also think everything we've ever known to be fact has turned out to be incorrect. So I tend to think of quote unquote facts as the foundation, the most we know so far, and really good foundations to build upon to learn the next level.
yeah.
So that's
Yeah, it's in the sciences we have various laws, like so and so's law, Hooke's law, and Moore's law, and all these things. And a really a single change in terminology from law to heuristic would be very good, because it really is not that it's always true all the time. It's just we've observed this, and it's a good model for how things appear to be in a vast number of trials. True facts are really only obtained in mathematics, where a fact is another name for a theorem, and a theorem is something which is provably true from axioms. So mathematics is it's not that it's true necessarily, but it's if I have these set of assumptions, then I can show from logic that this thing must in fact be true. And again, of course, if you change the assumptions, then you can change what becomes facts.
I guess I'll ask you one more mathematics question before, and then I'd love to get into a little bit about your story and your NDEs and everything that happened. But, and maybe this is what you already answered, but from what I've understood about math, is it's mainly all fact, everything you know, 2 + 2 = 4. 99% of us educated in math have only learned the fact. But when you start getting into higher level mathematics, the facts and known goes away, and it gets a lot more theoretical instead of factual. And
Well, I wouldn't make a dichotomy there. It does get more theoretical, which needn't necessarily mean it's not factual. So it's like the so-called imaginary numbers. Like, so-called imaginary numbers are a fact. They exist as part of reality. We can solve physical equations using imaginary numbers or complex numbers that we literally wouldn't be able to solve without using complex numbers. And it's an interesting situation, because you could take like an electrical system, you solve it, you have to go into the complex field to solve it, and then you go back to the real numbers to sort of get the final solution. Um, but there is a different way to put it would be that in more advanced mathematics, there is a lot more abstract things. Like this whole world of complex analysis, like engineers use it for practical things, but there's also an entire universe of um, extremely abstruse things that the average person will never encounter, will never need to encounter, will never need to think about. For example, I've done some work on something called the Riemann hypothesis, and the Riemann hypothesis is a very famous unsolved math problem that is probably the most famous unsolved math problem in the world at the moment. And when people ask me, like, well, so what is it that you're trying to solve over here? And it's like, well, I can tell you the basics of the problem in like about 2 or 3 minutes, but you need 4 or 5 years of advanced mathematics to really understand what I said. Like it's out there, and it may in a few hundred years or a few thousand years have some application to reality, as we call it, but it's certainly not evident what the application would be, right now in 2024. Um, so it does get more abstract, but it's important to realize that we can deal with truths that are known truths, which is what I would call a fact or a theorem. We can deal with truths that are known truths that have no direct bearing on our sensually experience of physical reality or so-called physical reality. And I think this is important because I think we're moving to a time in human development where um, in order for humanity to advance in an effective way, we need to become more and more comfortable with that level of dealing with truth in that way. That it doesn't have to be, the old adage, I only see it if I only believe it if I can see it, or whatever like that. It's actually very, very, very limiting. And in fact, we do a lot of stuff now that is sort of the halfway step to that. Like we all use cell phones. Well, cell phones rely on this thing called electromagnetic radiation, which fundamentally we have mathematical equations that can describe how it works, and we can use it, we can engineer things with it, but we don't really fundamentally know what it is. But it doesn't matter that we don't know what it is. We can work with it. And so that's a very simple example. But as we proceed as a society, a human society, the entire Earth society, and especially as we proceed into realms such as what happens to us after the death of the physical body, and things like that. What is our consciousness? Capital C, things like that. We're going to need to become much more adept at dealing with these facts that are not immediately accessible through physical senses.
Fascinating. I'm so wish I could understand the math theory you're working on now, but obviously from what you said, I don't have 5 years of math to even begin to understand what you'd say. Now I'm like, oh, I want to go study math.
Like
But
I can, if you like, remind me at the end. I can give you the 2 minute basic description. It's not very exciting. I can warn you that, but it gets a lot more exciting when you understand what's under the hood or whatever. But anyway.
okay, I'm making a note to remind myself to ask you at the end of the end of our talk. So now let's get into your NDE. So tell us what happened. You had two NDEs, from what I remember.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So tell me what was going on in your life. And I mean, if there's anything too personal, just tell me. And I, of course, won't ask it. But as much as you're comfortable sharing, what was going on in your life that led to your first NDE?
Yeah. So, I mean, my interesting setup. My first NDE near death experience happened on June 19th of 1998, I guess it was. And so I would have been 20 years old, shortly to turn 21, I guess. And at the time, I had recently dropped out of college for the first time. I was an active alcoholic. I had a pretty serious drinking problem, which is a big part of why I dropped out of college. I ended up dropping out of college a total of 6 times before I finally got my first degree. So I had dropped out, and I was a little bit, floundering a little bit. I mean, I had gotten a job, so I was working full time, and just trying to figure out what was next for me. And I was planning on going back to college that fall. I had just dropped out the previous spring, and I was actually on my way out of a liquor store. Um, and the extent of my alcoholism, this is too personal. I don't know, but I had gone out and bought a bottle of whiskey earlier in the night, and then a fella came over and we were going to be hanging out, and so I thought, well, the one bottle was for me. If I'm going to have friends over, I need more. So we actually went out to the liquor store for the second time that night, and I bought a second bottle of whiskey, and I was waiting at I was about to cross the intersection to wander home, and the the signal, the don't walk signal. I took one step off of the curb, and the don't walk signal went from walk to blinking don't walk. And a funny little aside is that I'm kind of a nerd, so I look things up all the time that I'm curious about. And a lot of people don't know, but there's a legal distinction between when the don't walk sign is blinking and when it's not blinking. The rule is if it says walk, then you can proceed across the crosswalk. If it says don't walk and it's blinking, what that legally means is if you're already in the crosswalk, continue across. But if you're not yet in the crosswalk, don't enter it. And if it says don't walk and it's not blinking, that means you should not be in the crosswalk at all. So I took one step off the curb. So I had 1 foot on the curb and 1 foot in the crosswalk, and it switched to blinking don't walk. So my logical brain went, this is a conundrum. Like am I in the intersection or not? If I'm in the intersection, I should proceed across. If I'm not, then I should, stay on the curb. And so I looked at it like, well, I had 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It was a choice. I could go either way. And what's funny is I was always, and I probably still struggle with this, a very, very selfish person. So I was the kind of person that if I could take something for myself, I would, pretty much universally. So as far as I was concerned, I had, quote, permission to cross at that moment. And I started to lean forward to keep walking. And I had this thought enter my head, not this time. And I stepped back up onto the curb, and a split second later, the accident happened. And this car was fleeing an accident that had been caused up the street. She was apparently going about 70 miles an hour, came into the cross street and hit a car, and that car flipped up onto the curb and hit me, and knocked the traffic signal pole that was next to me off of its mooring, and that apparently landed on top of me. Smashed out the wall of the building behind me, to give you an idea of how fast it was going. And so it's one of those things like a seemingly trivial detail, but if I had stepped forward a couple steps, I mean, I would have been run over by multiple cars instead of clipped by one, because the car hit me. The back end of the car was flipping around, and it hit me. It threw me through the air, and I know all these facts because I read the police report. My experience at that point shifted into three different perspectives. I simultaneously was viewing the scene as though there were a camera like up in the corner of the intersection, like on one of the buildings or something, like a overall panoramic view of the scene. And so I was aware of that perception, and I was also aware of standing with a man in a business suit, like up in the air, like maybe 10 feet up in the air. What's funny is I had the perception of standing there talking to him while seeing myself standing there talking to him from up in the corner of the intersection. And I had a simultaneous experience of like my body being in my body flying through the air. But that one was really muted. Like that one sort of, it was like I could see it in the overall panoramic, but the most of the focus of my consciousness was between standing there with this man and the up in the corner overview. And this man said, something's happened. There's been an accident. You're going to be okay. But it's pretty bad, but you're going to be okay. It's not your time yet. And I said, okay. And he said, you still have work to do. And I said, what do I have to do? And he said, you'll know when the time comes. And I said, well, when's that going to be? And he said, you'll know when the time comes. I'm putting you back now. And so it was, not to leave any mystery or anything. And then the third perception started to come in, and it was me in my body going through the air, but it was actually he was holding me like cradling me like this, like he was carrying me. And as he said, I'm putting you back now, it sort of shifted into me having that awareness of being like in his arms like a baby. And he set me down on the ground, and then there was like a black period, and then I woke up. And I woke up. I actually had like amnesia at first. People were saying, like, what's your name? And I said, I don't know. And then they looked at my license, and 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 oh, that is me. That's right. And they looked at my birthday and everything like that. And um, what was really interesting though was I didn't tell anybody about this. Three parts of my consciousness and talking to this person in the suit. Um, and then about 3 weeks later, as a result of the accident, I had broken my leg in a few places. I had broken my arm. I was in a wheelchair for about 4 months, and I ended up moving back in with my parents. And my mom, who had formerly been a nurse, took some time off of work to care for me. And about 3 weeks after the accident, we were talking, and she and my father had come up to the scene of the accident the next day when they found out about it, and they went and they talked to some people that were nearby, and there was a woman across the street running a water ice stand, which for those not from the Philadelphia area, that means Italian ice, which is it's kind of like an ice cream, but we call it water ice for some reason. Anyway, so there's a woman who had a water ice stand who witnessed the entire accident, and she told my mother that when she saw my body flying through the air, I was completely limp, and she thought for sure that I was dead, but that she knew I was going to be okay because, and this is a quote, when he landed as gently as though an angel had placed him on the ground. And so my mom tells me this, and I started tearing up, and I said, "Mom, I got to tell you something." So I explained to her about my experience and of course, it was like, that was probably the most significant part of the experience, because for me, it was like, after it happened, it was significant to me, but I sort of dismissed it as like, okay, it was like a dream, or, my brain was doing whatever my brain was doing while I was, experiencing physical trauma and everything. But that seemed to me to be a kind of a confirmation, because it was just such a very particular thing to say, and it aligned so much with my own personal experience of what happened. And so from that point on, that was where the crack in uh, my resistance to contemplating what all this could mean started to really open up.
That's that must have been just life changing. So, yeah, I mean, and then the evidence of, angel, the word the woman used,
Yeah,
that, I mean, that's just evidence because that goes against physics to see, that see that pace of, you know, the experience you had. I
yeah.
want to not say it too brutally. So, yeah. Um, so now you had a second NDE, but I'm going to ask you, after that first one and in between the second one, what were your thoughts on an afterlife? Because prior to that, you thought the way I used to, consciousness created by a brain, no question there. And then what did you think after this first one?
Yeah, so I mean, it took a long time for me to really parse it, because I mean, I'm a hyper logical person, so it's like it has to make logical sense for me. And interestingly, one of the things that really helped me to open up was this the fact that I had three distinct perceptions of the same event. That was very, very meaningful for me, because it had just never occurred to me that a person could have three separate conscious experiences from three completely different perspectives from within the same person or whatever. I didn't have a framework. If consciousness is an epiphenomenon of the brain, and I'm experiencing things through my eyes and my other senses, there was no method for having these three separate experiences. It just didn't make any sense. And yet I had experienced it, and I had this sort of confirmation of at least the one aspect of it. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, what do I think about consciousness? Like, what do I really know about consciousness versus what I've been assuming? And so I went through this period of many years, really, where I was sort of would think to myself, what is necessarily true about the world, like, not based on something I've been told, not something I believe, but it has to be true. There's no other way then for it to be like that. And if you think about like Descartes' doubt, Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." He doubted everything he could think of to doubt, but he couldn't doubt that he was in fact thinking. and therefore there was something there thinking. And I actually took that a little bit more extreme. I thought, all right, well, I think, therefore I am still has this idea of the self as I, that there is an I that is doing the thinking. And that is too much of an assumption because, my perception was in three different places. So which part is the singular part? Which part is the I? So I started to question, you know, I think, therefore I am seems to be a very good basis. But like I said, it was a little bit too much of an assumption. And so I finally came to the conclusion that the only thing that you absolutely have to have as a necessary assumption about reality is that consciousness exists. Like, consciousness might not be what I think it is, right? It might be epiphenomenal in some way. It might be epiphenomenal of something more fundamental. But the fact that you can even have such questions implies that there's consciousness somewhere. Again, it might not be that I might be the side effect of it or something. I might be a bot running in the matrix, and I just think I have consciousness. But the point is that consciousness itself must exist. But then, of course, that begs the question: like, what does existence mean? What does it mean to have something exist versus not exist? And I thought, all right, well, we have to have consciousness, and I'm going to put on the shelf for a moment what the word existence means. We have to have consciousness because we can't be asking the question without it. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we can't be asking the question without it. What about existence? What does it mean for something to exist? Well, if the only thing I'm absolutely sure of that exists is consciousness, then consciousness must be a self-sustaining thing. In other words, I don't want to have two assumptions about reality if I can help it. If I can get away with just one, that's better, right? So existence, or being, something being there, is what it means for it to exist, right? Being could be the same thing as consciousness. And if you think about it, it sort of is self-consistent in that um, everything I've ever been aware of, I've been aware of through my own consciousness. Maybe aided by other things, but everything I've ever experienced, including fears and things that are imaginary, they still come to me through my own consciousness. So any way of apprehending being, whatever being means, has to be through consciousness, at least in my own experience. I have no other way of apprehending the so-called existence of anything except through consciousness. And then I of course, I'm a mathematician, so there's this branch of mathematics called set theory. And in set theory, you deal with what's called a set, and a set is like a collection of objects. And set theory can be considered the foundation of mathematics, in that fundamentally any kind of mathematics can be encoded in terms of set theory. Now, that's not how we actually do math, but if you wanted to make mathematics extremely rigorous, you could go backwards and code everything down into terms of set theory. And set theory starts with very few axioms, which is why it's sort of nice that we can encode all of mathematics this way. And one of the axioms of set theory is that you assume that there exists such a thing as a set. And you assume that there exists at least one of these objects, this thing called a set. Now, what is a set? A set is a collection of things. So if the only assumption that you have so far is that there exists this ability to contain things, and there's at least one of them, but you don't have any other assumptions about reality, the only thing you can possibly put in your container is an empty set. So you have this empty set. There's nothing in the container. But once you have this empty set, you can then put the empty set into its own container, and now we have two things. We have a set which contains nothing, and we have a set which contains the set which contains nothing. It's like the difference between an empty box and a box containing an empty box, right? And then and now we have two things, and we can put those two things in another box, and so forth. And you can build up number systems this way, and you can build up functions, and you can build up anything you can model mathematically. You can fundamentally model in terms of set theory. So, okay, getting back to consciousness. If everything I've ever experienced as being in existence, I've experienced through my consciousness, I can think of my consciousness as like a container. I say my consciousness. I can think of consciousness as a container, all right? And if consciousness is like a container, then what's in the consciousness, what's in the container, is whatever I'm consciously aware of. So I can think of consciousness and awareness as being kind of like the same thing, like which I don't want to get too far afield, but it sort of makes sense if you think about it. It's like if I'm conscious of something, it means I'm aware of it. If I'm aware of something, I'm conscious of it. Um, and if I define something's existence or its being as the fact of it being in awareness, something is aware of it. It's in consciousness somewhere. That's what makes it exist. Then consciousness, awareness, and being all really are the same thing. And so I came to the conclusion that the only necessary feature of reality is consciousness, and that consciousness is, and the addition of the word is like redundant, because is a form of the word to be, and being and consciousness are the same thing. So um, fundamentally, I got this idea that consciousness is the only thing that exists. Consciousness can be aware of itself, and so therefore, just like with set theory, you can differentiate sets, but they're all the same fundamental kind of thing. And consciousness can take on the aspects like we consider like subject object dichotomy. Like I think of this as, I am that, or you are that. Well, if you think about the story of Moses and the burning bush, and the burning bush was meant to have the voice
Um,
of God.
Myself included, can you explain that? Most of my listeners, I think, not most, a lot of us are atheists and might not know that
Okay,
story.
sure. So
So,
there's a story that Moses encounters God in the form of a burning bush that speaks to him, and it's like a proxy, because you can't actually encounter God because it's too overwhelming for your consciousness or whatever. So the idea is this: he hears this voice coming from this burning bush, and he more or less he asks it. And I'm not an expert, all right. So talk to someone who's an expert on Old Testament history or whatever. But the as the story goes, he asks what the name of God is. He asks the burning bush, "What is your name?" And the bush responds, "I am that which is," or something to that effect, or fundamentally, "I am." And so "I am" is considered the name of God. And this was important to the people of that time, because it's retrospectively important, because the people of that time did not have the theological were not theologically advanced enough to have come up with that without Moses having been told that. That's the idea. But if you go back to that story, that, "I am that which is," if you think of that which is as being being, then God is saying, "I am being." So you parse that sentence for a second. I am being. So I is the subject, am is the verb, and being is the object. I am being. So God, the subject, what is he doing? He's being. He is. I am. And what is he being? He's being. So if you think about it, it's like a way of parsing out this idea. If the only thing that exists is consciousness, and consciousness can contain things in itself, and consciousness is the same as being, then what is it that is being? Being is being. And what is it doing? It's being. So I think of the whole world in terms of this sentence: being, being. And it's all the same thing. It's just one thing. It's being, it's consciousness, it's awareness, it's existence. You could think of it as existence being existence, right? But they're all the same thing. So being the subject, being the verb, being the object, and they're all the same thing, and they're all consciousness or awareness. And if you again go back to set theory and you think of it in terms of that, it's like we now have a single assumption, which is that consciousness or being exists. Being is being, or whatever. You can keep adding in words like being and existing, and make it more complicated. But that's the idea, that there's a single thing, which is being, and the way that that being interacts with itself, or that consciousness interacts with itself, creates more and more complicated patterns. And fundamentally, those more complicated patterns become mathematics. And fundamentally, that becomes, the sensory experience of the world. It all comes down to being, being, being. So that was what I came up with after my first near death experience and prior to my second one. And it's it's interesting because the second one was like a breakthrough in that I had come up with this theoretical understanding of reality, which made sense to me. It was consistent. It could describe phenomenal reality and describe things that we can't see directly and things like that. It was a robust theory in my opinion. And I had like the sort of nature of reality on this side and the way I was living my life on this side, like still as like an active alcoholic, a very selfish person, very materialistic acting person. Um, and it really was this like sort of cognitive dissonance. I'm like, I really think that this is correct, but I'm acting like this is correct. And so I got to the point where I had to really either stop believing that this is correct and just ignore it, which didn't seem viable, or stop acting like this because this was not consistent with what I thought reality was actually like. And it was around that time that I had this second near death experience, which was brought on by acute alcohol poisoning. I had much too much to drink one night, and I basically collapsed and on the sidewalk in New York City, and nearly died on the sidewalk. And I know that I nearly died in that experience because I recognize the feeling of being in that place, which is funny because if you had asked me the day before that, like, can you describe what it felt like when you were like, on the other side or whatever? I would have said, well, I don't know. I don't know that it had a particular feeling. Like it just didn't, it's like a smell or something. Like how do you describe a smell, that you smelled one time, but you don't remember. But then if you smell it again, you're going to be like, oh, that's that very particular smell that I smelled that one particular time. It's just going to come back to you like a sensory thing. And it was like that. It was like, the second experience was very much like the typical quote unquote, it's not typical, but you get the idea, like tunnel with a white light. And I was just sort of slowly floating through this black tunnel, although it's not black, it's full of like information, colors that you can't see and things like that. You just sort of experience it. But the point is that there was nothing in particular that was distinguishing about it, except that when I was in that space, it was instantly recognizable. And again, that was particularly informative to me because I would have told you in advance that there was nothing to recognize. I didn't remember that feeling until I re-experienced it. And when I re-experienced it, it was like, oh, I know what's happening right now.
Okay, so during the second, you collapsed and then you felt yourself or experienced, I won't say felt, you genuinely experienced yourself going through a tunnel and you said you saw colors. And are these colors that we would have never seen here on Earth?
Yeah, it's even to say saw colors is like not quite descriptive. It's kind of like see if I can think of a good metaphor for the listeners at home. We just edited out 3 hours of Sky staring up into the ceiling, trying to figure out how to put this. You ever have someone tell you a joke? Okay. So most jokes have a familiar setup. It's like there's a logical progression, there's a sudden jump, and the punchline is not what you expected based on what you were like anticipating, right? And it's like if someone tells you a joke but you think you've heard the joke already, so you anticipate the punchline and you think it's hilarious, but then they tell you something different. All right, the punchline that you thought was coming never happened, right? But something was experienced in that process, and it all happens like almost instantaneously. It's like you have this expectation of something, and then something else is happening and now you're reacting to the real punchline, but there's this like thing in the background, this like energetic imprint of the punchline that didn't happen. That is like a 1% attempt at trying to explain this. Like we have lots of colors in reality, right? We have lots of sensory input. um when they talk about a black tunnel, from my experience, in my experience, it was like a black tunnel with a white bright point at the end of it. Except that it was almost like swimming with stuff. Like if you imagine looking at a screen and you think the screen is off, but when you get closer, or if you turn out all the other lights in the room and let your eyes adjust, you realize there's this pulsing color thing on the screen, but you just couldn't see it because it was too bright in the room or something like that. It's kind of like that. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like it's like massively full of information, but it's not information that I have a way of describing what it is or even understand what it is. So they talk about like the color of the black light. And I was listening to a talk by Scott Taylor, the NDE researcher, excuse me, the NDE and shared death experience researcher, and he was talking about this the so-called black light, and described that when people talk about the black light, they often talk about it as being full of colors that are not visible in the normal spectrum. And I had never heard that described before. And when he said that, I said out loud, like, that's it, that's a great way of putting it. I had never thought of it like that, because I would talk about a black tunnel with a white light, but it didn't quite fit. Like, it didn't make sense, but I didn't know how to articulate that. It didn't make sense. And obviously I still don't know how to articulate it clearly, but I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah. I mean, you can't explain a color that nobody has seen. You can't explain
Yeah.
sight to a blind person, or blind since birth.
Yeah.
So, finish. Tell the stories, the full story of your second NDE, as much as you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So I had just left this bar where I had been with my wife at the time, and I was excessively drunk. I was suffering from acute alcohol poisoning. I collapsed. I face plant on the sidewalk, and I'm experiencing, sort of floating through this black tunnel towards the white light, like I said, one of the sort of classic NDEs. And from very far off in the distance, I heard my wife at the time, Laura. I heard Laura's voice saying, "You have to get up. I'm not mad. I love you, but you have to get up." And she kept saying it over and over again. "I love you. I'm not mad, but you have to get up. You have to get up." And when I tell you it was far away, it was like I was, like I was in a valley and she was on the mountaintop. Like, that's how far away it felt. But it was distinct, but very, very, very much in the distance, if that makes sense, which it only sort of makes sense, because it's not that it was quiet, right? It was distinct, but it was like my attention was not there. It was like my attention was, because I was sort of floating towards this white light. And the thing you got to understand is that the white light, which is like extremely attractive. Like, attractive doesn't make any sense except in the strict definition, like, it attracts you. It's not attractive like a person's attractive. It just, you're literally being pulled towards it, like moving towards it, floating towards it, whatever. Um, and so the idea of anything else other than going that way was just seemed like it was very far in the distance. But she kept saying it over and over again, and she kept saying, "I'm not mad. I love you, but you have to come back." And after, I don't know how many times she said it, but at some point I had the thought, well, maybe I should go back. And as soon as I had that thought, it
And
was
you
like,
had that thought while you were in this
while I'm getting,
semi-indescribable tunnel. Okay.
yeah, exactly. I'm like floating, I'm getting closer, to the white light or whatever. And I have this thought, well, maybe I should go back. Like, I started focusing a little bit on the what she was saying, and as soon as that happened, it was like a violent suction. I felt like, literally, like I was sucked back into my body, and I literally, like it was like a physical impact of hitting my body, and it was horrible. I mean, it was like a horrible feeling. It was um probably one of the singular, like, most unpleasant experiences I've ever had in my life, because it was two things. It was like going from this place of all the stuff we talk about, like this like indescribable peace. This place of indescribable peace is the best way I can describe it. And suddenly, instantaneously, getting sucked from that into this body, which like today it's like I'm used to it. It's like, okay, it's my body. I love my body. I'm very grateful for my body. It's doing an awesome job at propelling me through earth, right? But compared to like infinite expansiveness, it's so like claustrophobic in here. Like dealing with the world through five senses is so crazy compared to the perception that's available, right? And 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 I know that now with having done lots of meditation and having access that kind of perception again and things like that. But in that moment of just going from the one to the, it's like diving into freezing cold water or something like that, or boiling hot water or so. It was just like awful. And on top of that, my body that I was being sucked back into was like physically sick, like dying of alcohol poisoning. So it was the normal like crushing in of conscious awareness into this small little package, combined with that package is violently ill right now. So it was very, very, very unpleasant and uncomfortable. But when I, recovered from the alcohol poisoning and everything like that, um, it really did help to wake me up um, because of that feeling. Like I said, if you had asked me the day before that if there was a special particular feeling associated with that state, I would have said I don't think so, or I don't remember or something like that. But having re-experienced it, it was like absolutely clear to me. Like I recognized the feeling. And again, it's not something I expected. That's part of the thing that helped penetrate this my hyper skeptical mind, was that it was completely unexpected. I was not expecting to remember that feeling, and the fact that I did really, because there was still this, okay, I have this sense of what reality is all about kind of thing, but there's still this part like, okay, maybe I'm making all of this up and I've convinced myself and I've deluded myself that this thing makes sense even though it doesn't, because who can I talk to about it? Most people will think I'm crazy if I start talking about being the only thing that exists and so forth. um, so it really was it's if you believe in order in the universe, like a higher power, or what sometimes they call the greater consciousness system. The greater consciousness system, or my guides, or however you want to think of it, knew that I needed like an extra slap in the head to really have the breakthrough, because I was just too stubborn to let go after the first one.
Yeah. Okay. So I have lots of questions about the first two, that both of them I need to ask. So the man, I was waiting to ask about him until I heard if he appeared again in your second, but that man who you spoke with in the suit from the first, he didn't show up in your second one.
No, no, I mean, not that I'm aware of.
Okay. What have you found out, what who he is and what your purpose is that he told you you were going back for?
Yeah. Who he is, I don't know. I've never found that out, and I honestly, I suspect, I have my suspicions. There's a program at the Monroe Institute called Lifeline, and in Lifeline, the purpose of Lifeline is to train participants to be able to assist people transitioning from living as humans to whatever comes next. And so you go into meditation and you basically show up for people who are in this transitory state, um, and you sort of help guide them towards the light. A lot of people find it just fine, but there's this sort of idea that certain people kind of get confused after they die and they're not sure that they're dead, or for whatever reasons that they're holding on to things or whatever, they need some sort of help with the transition. As an aside, there's an excellent movie called No Solar, which the English name of the movie is, I think it's called The Astral City. It's I think it's a Brazilian film. I can't remember now, but No Solar, The Astral City. You got to see it. I when I was watching it, I was thinking, whoever wrote this knows what they're talking about. Like, it is spot on, very good. And I won't say anything else about it. But anyway, there's a scene at the beginning where the main character has just died at the beginning of the movie, and it's sort of his travels after death. Anyway, So in Lifeline, you're trained to be like a guide or an assistant, and I've often suspected that perhaps this was somebody who just sort of was there to help. Not necessarily someone uniquely particular to me, but just someone who is one of many conscious beings out there that was there to help at that moment. As far as what my purpose was, it's tricky because I anytime I have a thought like I think this is my purpose, right? Then there's just like so many like clouds of ego and confusion and all this other stuff layered on top of it. However, when I first had the experience, I was 20 years old, and when I said, when will that be? Because he said you'll know when the time comes. He said, when will that be? And he said you'll know when the time comes. I had this feeling like the first stage would be about 10 years later. And in fact, it was 10 years later that I got sober. I've now been sober for a little over, well, almost 16 years. And I got sober when I was 30. And I had a feeling that it was going to be around when I was 30 was like the first stage, but that wasn't the thing, but that was like part of it. And of course, certainly getting sober was a huge impact on my life.
Is
And
that when you had your second NDE?
yeah, it
Is
was.
that what got
Well,
you
I'd love
sober
to say
or?
I got sober right after that. No, it was like 8 months after that.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a little stubborn. And and it just as an aside, it goes to show the nature of alcoholism and addiction. I mean, it can literally kill you, and yet a person will hang on for dear life. Like, let me see if I can just ride this out. Let me just have one more. It's awful. It's an awful disease. But in any event, yeah, the following year I got sober, and I've stayed sober since then with a lot of help. And in that time, I ended up going back to school. I ended up getting a master's degree, and long story slightly shorter, the Riemann hypothesis that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, I ended up being drawn to that problem, and I ended up feeling over time that the part of my purpose was to solve that problem, this 160-year-old previously unsolved math problem. And in fact, I actually have over the course of 6 years, I've been working on it. I have come up with a paper, and it's on archive.org, and it's right now under peer review, and I just presented it at a math conference a week ago, and I think I've solved it. I now there's a long process ahead in terms of people like checking it and that kind of thing, but I as of right now, I've checked it with a colleague, a professor at my department, and another colleague who's he and I were students together, and he's one of the sharpest mathematical minds I've ever met in my entire life. The two of them have been checking it with me, and so and again, I is it my purpose to solve the Riemann hypothesis? Um, if it comes back that my proof is correct, I'll say that that was part of it. Maybe it's my purpose to think I solved the Riemann hypothesis and discover more things from that. I only ever know the amount of information that I know. But I do think that part of my purpose is to have solved this major problem, the Riemann hypothesis, and to direct people's attention to the fact that I had a multiple, but one in particular, major breakthrough on this problem in meditation at the Monroe Institute. The Monroe Institute has a program called Problem Solving 12, where you go into this expanded state of consciousness that they call Focus 12, and you basically ask a question of the greater consciousness system. And long story short, I had been working on this problem for about 4.5 years or so at that point. 4.5, 5.5 years, 5.5 years at that point, and had discovered a pretty significant error in part of the thing I had been relying on, and needed to basically throw that piece out and do something else, and didn't really know what to do with it. And so I decided I'm just going to ask for the solution. And there's detailed signs that led up to all this, and there's a whole process. But long story short, in meditation at the Monroe Institute, doing Problem Solving 12, I asked what is the correct structure of this math function, and I got this. I didn't get it like written out. I got this like sense, and that sense. It took me about 4 or 5 days to write it out as a function, as it mathematically expressed. But that piece that I got in meditation is absolutely fundamentally key to my proof. And so I have this feeling like, if in fact my proof is correct, then people will say, oh my gosh, how did you solve this 160-year-old problem? And there may be some advantage to saying, I solved this problem by connecting with a higher aspect of myself, a non-physical aspect of myself, or of a greater self, combined self, or however you want to think of it. And it worked. Like, it really, really, really worked. And people really need to know about this. This is not it's like, it's not even esoteric anymore. It's like, it's available. Like, the Monroe Institute has been around for 50 years at this point. People can go, you can do meditations, you can do online stuff. It's like, this kind of opening up of consciousness is available to regular people. Like I like to joke, you don't have to almost be killed in order to have, a mind expanding sense of your own consciousness. And I think that is a very, very important message to be out there. And I think that is the purpose that I was spared for, to get that message out there, that people, human beings, a can a or step zero, we are more than our physical body. And then step one, it's like, we can access this aspect of ourself that's non-physical, and maybe even more importantly, we need to access this aspect that's non-physical, because when you start to think of things from this global consciousness perspective, or universal consciousness perspective, where consciousness is the only thing that is, all of a sudden you realize things like war, and even things like disagreements between, like, I'm annoyed at my wife for something. It's like when you look at it from the right perspective, it's insane. Like, it's insane for human beings to fight with each other. Like, I believe war to be a psychosis. Like, by the time at which you get to the point where you're trying to physically injure other beings, something broke down long before that, and we got to get down to like causes and conditions, and really look at like who we really are, and not at all this superficial stuff.
Oof. I wish
I
everyone
know.
felt like that. No, I'm with all the horrors and heartbreak in the world and violence. I completely agree with you on that, and wish it was that way. So this is the end of part 1 of my conversation with Professor Sky Waterpeace. The next episode will be the rest of our conversation, where he talks about many more absolutely mind-blowing things, such as how mathematics could tie in to an afterlife. And he goes into some more about some of the theories of mathematics, including how math is more theoretical, how it could tie into our consciousness, and he talks about it in a way that is understandable and relatable, so you won't be completely lost. So, see all of you next episode. Hey, everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There, you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, a sciencey-skeptic explores grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFjusthappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?